Fuck these nihilist cunts.
Alright, response video to two different videos, and I probably shouldn't mix these things, but I really don't know how to separate them either. Modern Mystic and Luddite Returns. So Modern Mystic sort of argues it's just the universe universing, so negating any real importance to the consequential sentient experience. It's just, we're just nebulas, we're just mechanical devices, there is no real thing happening, there's just matter transitioning through whatever the mechanisms of material transitioning. And then Luddite Returns is arguing in defense of the value, the real value of the glorious satisfaction of the hunger. Basically saying, here's a scenario, try to make it more graceful. The romantic love scene, Romeo and Juliet, the consummation, the building up with the orchestra to the grand, beautiful events of lovemaking, and a rock. And you could look at these two things and say, which state would you prefer to be in? But that would require you to have some knowledge of what immunity over time really is like. And you can't imagine being a rock. You can't imagine being nothing, having no burden of consciousness. I might argue, in meaning I haven't written it down in eloquent language, that what you're perceiving when you're perceiving something glorious is really the absence of the negative, that you're being released of your burdens that you carry with consciousness, and that in fact the rock is in a euphoric state. It just doesn't bother smiling to show you it. It doesn't have a it doesn't have any mechanism for expressing it or even composing it. I mean, it's not actually in euphoria. I'm just saying that it is the releasing of all of our burdens that creates this sense of, it's the completion of the math, of eradicating the negatives that blight and consume and manipulate us, and that's the real thing. It does manipulate us. So, yeah, my premise is that we start from a negative state. That's the initial default beginning starting state is negative, decidedly negative, and that all movement is decidedly positive from that perspective. And that's just the nature of this hunger chase game. And if you don't have the hunger, if there's nothing moving you, obliging you to move, then you don't move. And that's a significant truth. You wouldn't create a thing that wasn't in a fairly comfortable or in an acquisition of relief state. If creating something that's injured just for a few milliseconds or seconds even, just so you can give it the sensation of liberation from that burden. If you could almost reverse the imposition of an intrusion that causes you great pain, and just as cleanly extract it, there would be this sense, this condition change, that's very satisfying. It's a very good feeling. We call it good because it's so obviously different than bad. Becoming burdened is very different than becoming unburdened. They're you can recognize the difference between the two, almost like you could recognize a wheelbarrow horribly overloaded, and how the metal starts creaking and everything starts to break down from the stress, and taking the burden off, fixes all of that tension and bending and twisting and gnarling of its condition. So that's what I mean by this. That's where it's hard to have this argument. I mean, I think it can be understood that you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, theoretically. Okay, I can't say you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I'm just saying that there's nothing you can say about what exists to discount the truth that it is only your hunger, a mechanism of desire, a mechanism of deprivation, that makes you think where you are isn't good enough, and where you want to be is over there, because over there is where the water is. And the fact that we pay a huge price for these moments, like walking, I could metaphor, walking the desert for the oasis, miles across the desert for the oasis, and that first drink of water might be so precious, so how magnificent a feeling after days in the desert. But look at the price you had to pay to earn that appreciation. And I would argue to earn the beauty of the love, you have to earn it. You have to earn it through you have to build up the hunger. You have to build it up to have the crescendo, to have something worth, it's going to make a noise. It's going to have a medium to make a noise. You don't have the medium without first creating the struggle and the negative. So if I was to isolate, or be able to isolate, all the little negative burdens, blobs, and have you a la carte choose to purchase that, say, I'd rather be that than the rock, I don't think you would. So I think if all of this psychology had to be earned a piece at a time, you wouldn't take it. You wouldn't want it. It would be as obvious as, say, if you were stuck in a cell and somebody was force-feeding you, you would rather be a rock in that circumstance. And I'm saying in most of the acquisition of your hunger, your desire, your ambition, these things are built out of a compression, a loading of the spring, of a pulling of the bow to create this moment, where you can create the energy for this resolving. So I guess I would argue that there isn't either any clear proportion between what you get as relief and what you put in as burden. I mean, the compression is different than the release in terms of the value. Much of our release is in some sort of big, one moment, and the compression is slow and incremental, and in the end, it's I don't think it's a zero sum as soon as you create the negative. So, and I guess time would be a part of that. It's, how much time is spent in a state would be part of the calculation of the weight of that state, what its value weight is. And I guess I would argue that because you spend so much time in the tense, compressed state, that it has so much more value than the extraction from that state. But certainly what could be argued is that there's nothing rational about creating something capable, playing with this fire, playing with the heavily, years in a nursing home scenario, the worst kind of anguish and torment. It goes on for minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day, and it's a huge price to pay for accomplishing nothing, for just compressing something and having it bounce back. And there's nothing, I think it's obvious in the fact that we don't create these things. We don't sit there. The future, very soon, people are going to be able to do this stuff. They're going to be able to create clones very easily, do all kinds of creation experiments. And I don't think you're going to like what you're going to see. I don't think you're going to like what people are doing with this power to create, just as I don't like what you're doing with this natural, confined power. Humans with more power to play with this thing. I don't think you're going to like it. Because I don't think you're going to see anything rational in what people will do with it. It's glow-in-the-dark humans and such and whatever. But you can see right now, there's no... I don't lament the absence of the Martians. Theoretically, they could have twice our faculties, twice our organs, and twice our, in terms of power or size or sensitivity, they could have twice our consciousness. Yet I don't lament their non-existence. Why? Oh, that's because the only thing that makes this existence seem functional is the fact that I have an ego and everything I touch. So Midas kind of thing. I'm here, I touch it, I feel it, I'm part of it, therefore it must be gold. Well, it's not. That's just a projection of vanity and ego and probably another word for that kind of avarice and dependency on perception of superiority or perception of vitality or importance, self-importance is driving all of that mush. Alright. Yeah, so I guess this was mostly Luddite stuff, so I didn't really have to get the mystic stuff in here. Well, I'm going to throw it in anyway. I just don't, feel like making a third video, I guess. Anyway, so I'm just so this is the hunger game. That's the game you're saying is a good game because hunger is resolvable. Therefore, it's worth playing with. And I'm saying no. All right. So to the mystics' point, the mystics' theory is basically now if I was to be able to prove, let's just say it just doesn't matter what the real truth is, but let's just say my theory is correct, and this is how the universe really works. That the universe is just made up of a thing, a quanta, dominoes, and they flip, and they can be in two states, down or up. And they always, on every click of the clock, they're either in one state or the other state. They're either down or up. And the clock tick is a Planck constant. A certain light will travel, let's say 1 inch or whatever, in the Planck constant. And that's the amount of time it takes for a state change to take place, up or down. And so the only thing that moves in the universe is vibration. So if you imagine these dominoes, they're all set up, and they only go down for one clock tick, and then they pop right back up again. So they never stay down, is the point. So unlike dominoes you see in the real world, they defy gravity and pop back up again. And so any stimulus, and there's no friction losses, so you can poke it anywhere, and there'll be a chain reaction of the poke. The poke will go forever, theoretically. And it'll just, on the clock tick, just keep knocking another domino, another domino, another domino. And so you'd have to have some sort of container, theoretically, and so the vibration would bounce off the wall and bounce back in, and so it would be a very active system, you can imagine, if you could imagine anything, in terms of imagining a platform made of, I can't use a word to describe it, but just gigantic, like a million, times a million times a million times a million times a billion times a zillion times itself, cubed to the fourth power, kind of huge number of dominoes. And so this energy starts the movement of the dominoes, and the dominoes do the movement moves through the dominoes, and there is a mechanism that prevents the movement from escaping. You can call that gravity, or you can call that a container. It doesn't matter. If we have walls, around the whole domino game, then obviously and the walls are rubber, and so every movement into the wall bounces back out of the wall. So yeah, you can create a concussion, a movement, with enough dominoes moving in it, and then those dominoes will do all this moving, and then you just create a few simple forces that say, if two dominoes are down next to each other, what do they do theoretically? They stay down an extra clock tick, or something, just simple rules that somehow would allow these movements of the dominoes to start coalescing into shapes and forms, to start capturing each other, these vibrations, starting to recondense into something from the scattered, from all the noise they condense back into something with less noise. They stick to each other. Maybe that'd be a better thing to say. When two dominoes are down, whatever they do, they'll do together from now on until something forces them apart. Like some domino has to come straight in between the two of them in the opposite direction, or some kind of theory like that. That would be probably a better way to explain it, that the percussion forces change based on how things, when two dominoes hit each other, what happens? Something has to happen besides just bouncing back where they came from. So anyway, the point I want to get to was that, okay, so this is just a completely mechanical thing. It's just, the universe could be, as I just described, a thing just full of very simple things, doing very simple things, but just zillions of them. So their interrelationships are where all the complexity is. But the pieces themselves are very simple. So by the mystics' theory, because the pieces are simple, therefore anything the pieces create has no meaning, because it's just arrangement, because all he's thinking about is the material pieces, and he's not giving any credibility to any idea that anything else that they do can enter into the realm of meaning, that any arrangement has any meaning. And I guess what I'm going to argue is that arrangements that create consciousness, sensations, create huge amounts of filtered complexity, are significantly different. Do create something different. That it's clearly different. This complexity is clearly different. It's clearly different just because my heart beats. And my heart has to beat at a certain rate to keep everything doing what it's doing. I mean, the difference between me alive and me dead is a very subtle difference. The difference between me asleep and fully conscious is those are different states of being, of function, dramatically different. Me under anesthesia and me conscious. These are very different states. When I'm vulnerable and when I'm not. When I can experience horror and terror and horrible pain, and when I don't. I can't. That subtle part is shut down. And to say, when I show those two things, somebody anesthetized having surgery and somebody unanesthetized having surgery, there's an obvious difference. And it's a profound difference. It's a little tiny material difference, but has a huge difference in terms of function and fact. Fact of function. And so I just don't see any, again, this denying that there is function, or there's value created by the capacity to do experience, to feel. I just don't see how you can do that. I mean, to negate the fact that I'm conscious and I'm feeling just doesn't make any sense to me. I experience it. I mean, to tell me it doesn't mean anything, that it actually doesn't mean anything, whether I, stick a nail through my hand right now really, really slowly and experience all that pain, that it somehow doesn't matter, that it's no different than not putting a nail in my hand, that there somehow something valuable hasn't been squandered or wasted or spilled. I think it's obvious that something has been spilled, that something meaningful took place, and it was a waste. And so I guess part of what I'm trying to get to too is there's a state of the game, a fact of the material universe. You could say at every clock tick it's in a certain position, that everything is, the dominoes are up or they're down, or that everything's steady state. You could just freeze it and say this is a universe. But that couldn't do anything. That couldn't create any of this stuff, because now there is no time, there is no movement, none of it's happening, and it's only through it happening that you can manifest these things like consciousness. So it opens a different realm. It's beyond the matter. State changes is one of these fundamental things that are like a property, like a force. And some of that might be the source of this capacity to manifest even something like consciousness. But because we don't have an explicit diagram of the domino arrangement, the exact mechanism of the function, because you can slow it down as a model and almost negate its existence. If you could make 1 second 1,000,000 years, then what I'm doing consciously, you could in a way negate it, because what's happening is so somehow it loses all of its character in terms of what's really happening to it as it progresses through time. It just looks like energy thing and this thing and that, it just looks like things doing things, but they don't have any focus. And I guess that I probably just should have used that word right from the start, that what's happening inside our minds, our brains, is that there is a focus, there's a lensing that's taking something and expanding it, collecting it, And when you collect enough of it, you have a thing. You have gravity. You have magnetism. You have an effect that isn't insignificant. I'm just saying, and I'm going to, whether I know the physics or not, I'm just going to claim it's significant. I can tell it's significant. I'd rather not do these negative experiences. Profoundly rather not do them. And that's not an unreasonable statement, considering the fact that I've tasted it, I've experienced it, and so I can't. There's nothing illogical. You can't say the only logical perception is to negate the actuality or factuality of the sentient experience. It just doesn't make any sense, because you have it. You endure it. So, whatever. This is just a little bit irritating. I have to constantly defend, it's just kind of obvious. Oh, and the subject I didn't get to is the whole, this video is way too disconnected, damn it. Because I really wanted to get to Luddite's fascism argument. There's nothing more fascist than this, I'm going to impose my ambitions on somebody else. I'm going to impose my unresolved desire on somebody else. I'm going to be a pro-creator. The arrogance of that, the aggressiveness of that, satisfies the conditions of some notion of fascist, negating the price paid or the cost, and pretending you have authority. Isn't it a pretentious claim of authority? God gave me sperm, therefore, is that all you got? The nature gave it to me, therefore. Oh, come on. And that's all I see. I don't see any resort to any kind of authority to make such a decision, to play with this radioactive clay. You're going to claim something's fascist. That's fascist. To claim you are superior, capable, knowledgeable enough to risk that you know what's best. Yeah. Well, as you said, you can sit and spin on your knowledge of what's best. Fuck you, reckless asshole imposer. You're the fascist. Goose-stepping, on the victims.